The 9/11 memorial is tomorrow. 23 years after that tragic day, the U.S. faces a whole other level of terrorist threat, according to FBI Director Christopher Wray. That's with increased numbers of unvetted migrants entering the country amid heightened tensions after the October 7th attack on Israel. How can people worried about this threat cope? Joining us now for answers is the terrorist therapist, Dr. Carol Lieberman. She's a board-certified Beverly Hills psychiatrist and a best-selling author. She helps people mentally cope with terrorist attacks and the threat of such attacks. Dr. Carol, it's great to have you today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, Dr. Carol, it's really nice to see you. Starting us off, this is a very unique niche that you've got yourself in. Tell us a little bit more about this.
Sure. Well, I'm a born and bred New Yorker. And so when 9/11 happened, even though I had already moved to California, my heart was and still is in New York. And so I asked myself what I could do, because I had a sense that terrorism was going to be the biggest threat in our lifetime. And of course, it has turned out to be that way. And I asked myself, what could I do as a psychiatrist and an author and a television commentator and so on? How could I help people? And I decided, this terrorist therapist was born. I started with making things for airlines to help passengers be calmer on airlines after 9/11. Everybody was scared to fly. And then, of course, I've written 2 books. I do a podcast called The Terrorist Therapist Show. I've been to London and Paris and Israel. Well, I've been helping people who deal with terrorism in other ways, as well as, of course, America with 9/11. I am concerned that enough people aren't taking it seriously, not realizing that we are in danger. We are more in danger today than we ever were.
Yeah, I mean, we have the October 7th attack on Israel by the terrorist group Hamas, especially in the U.S. With the past 4 years, we've seen many, almost millions of people come across this border, and many of them are actually coming across completely unvetted. And FBI Director Christopher Wray, as I was saying, has said that there's a heightened threat against terrorism. So I'm wondering, what do you say to people who are struggling to deal with that?
Well, first I have to get them to recognize so many people in America are in denial that we are in so much danger. Even though they hear him say that, it's cognitive dissonance. On the one hand, one part of your mind, the logical part, hears that and says, oh, that's not good. And then the emotional part, you push it down into your unconscious mind, and then you pretend that doesn't exist. So this year, I'm sure you're going to be asking me about the truck. This year, I decided to, for 9/11, I've been for the past 4 years, 3 years, having a truck go around New York and Washington, D.C. with a music video that I created. Mostly for those past 3 years, it was warm and fuzzy and how to notice symptoms in yourself of PTSD when the anniversary triggers symptoms, what to do, how to get help, how to talk to your kids about terrorism, all kinds of things like that. This year, I changed it. I mean, there are some things from the original music video, but I added things to make people more concerned. I added October 7th and the fact that that's their 9/11. And I added things, that would, for example, there's a part at the beginning where it says, it plays the song, Where Were You When on that day, on 9/11, basically.
Such a touching song.
Yes, and so I go through that, showing the Twin Towers and all of the usual things, and then I show a picture of Palestinians in Gaza celebrating. Where were you when 9/11 happened? They were celebrating. So there are a few sort of controversial, kind of hard-hitting things, but you have to. That's the only way to get through to people, apparently. That, of course it's scary. Nobody wants to think of scary things. But we have terrorists, essentially terrorists, on our street corners. We have these protesters who, are essentially, pro-Hamas. What does pro-Hamas mean? Pro-terrorism. So we have to wake up to this. It's getting worse and worse. And in fact, at the colleges, their internal communications have said that they plan to escalate this year.
Well, I'm curious about, you've been doing this for a while. What kind of reactions have you gotten from people? Do you help people who were actually in the 9/11 attacks? And what has the reception been like to what you're doing?
Well, for people who, whether it's America for 9/11 or Paris, from their attacks, or London, they actually are very receptive. I mean, not necessarily people. They aren't all people who were actually in the attack, or sometimes families of people who were killed or injured in the attack. I talk with them as well, but even just people living in the same general area, they are interested. I mean, when you talk to people one-on-one, yes, they want to know these things, especially about how to talk to kids about terrorism. I've had very interesting experiences with kids, because sometimes parents think, oh, well, you can't, this is too scary to talk to my kid about, but you have to. I call it the birds and the bees talk for the 21st century. It's a fact of life, an uncomfortable fact of life, and parents feel awkward about talking about it, but you have to, because this is coming. It's here. And
how do you talk to kids about these horrible things?
Well, let's see. I'll give you an example.
Yeah, you have your book here.
Yes, just happened to have my book.
How convenient.
And it's called Lions and Tigers and Terrorists, Oh My, How to Protect Your Child in a Time of Terror. So the first half of the book is for parents and teachers and people who are talking with kids. And then the second half of the book is a picture book. So one good example is this picture, What is a Terrorist? And a terrorist is like a big bully on the playground. So, for even little kids, they can get that general sense. And then I go a little deeper, why do terrorists want to kill us? Why are they trying to bully us? That kind of thing. I talk about 9/11. I talk about the cartoon in France, the Boston Marathon. The important thing is to get kids to express their feelings about terrorism. Because if they don't talk about how they're feeling, they're going to stuff it down, and then that's going to cause psychological problems later on. That's the key thing. Not to think that kids don't know about this. They know about it, but they're very confused. They don't have the right information necessarily. And also, not to think that they don't have feelings about it. You have to get them to talk about how they feel.
Yeah, and I would imagine it's so important for kids, especially because, these things can get buried underneath and show up in other ways in people's lives.
Exactly.
And, talking about kids experiencing traumatic events, we did just see this shooting in Georgia in that high school where, unfortunately, 2 students and 2 teachers were killed. And this was a domestic event, of course, but still a lot of trauma there. So how would you, in your role as a therapist, advise these families in moving forward after such an experience?
Well, it's important to talk to kids, again, realistically, because this shooter fit the typical profile of school shooters. And that is, he came from a dysfunctional home where there was, if not abuse, certainly, there was abuse and also neglect. And he was bullied at school. He was an outcast at school. These are typical things that are in the life of a school shooter. And also, he was addicted to violent video games, obsessed with violent video games. Every school shooter in America has been obsessed with violent video games because, they have this bad home life, they have a bad school life, and they're alone, playing violent video games. So parents should talk to their kids about these are the things that would make someone turn into this. In school, teachers at least could really recognize the signs of someone who is likely to become a school shooter. If they see a kid eating alone all the time, for example, they see a kid being bullied all the time, these are signs. You want to find out if they only had asked more about the family, and I know that that's not necessarily a teacher's role. They're supposed to teach, not be therapists, but we do need more therapists in schools. And we need these therapists to look into what's happening in the family when a student is not seeming to be doing well. Because it's so interesting, bullies know which students to pick on. They know the weaknesses, the students who are going to have the biggest reaction to their bullying. That's what they want. And so parents and they can explain all of this, how these things come to make someone feel so angry and want to get attention and all of that. And if students understand it, then it's not as scary.
Yeah, that kind of segues into my next point about building resilience to these kinds of things, to potential terror threats, as well as shootings in schools or elsewhere. How can families or individuals or communities get into a place where they're able to respond emotionally more effectively when these things actually do happen? God forbid they do happen.
Well, ideally, parents should be doing these things before they happen in your neighborhood or to your family.
Yeah.
By a lot of different. I give a lot of examples of things that you can do. First of all, making the child healthy, physically and psychologically healthy. That's sort of the baseline. And then explaining things, as I was saying before, also getting them to express their feelings about things, not letting them watch violent video games, sometimes getting them to do exercise. I mean, not to be sitting on their phone all the time, but to be out in the world doing exercise and it's a whole series of things that you need to work on to just make your child be in the best position, the best way, physically and psychologically, that they can be. So whatever happens, whether it's a school shooting or a terror attack, they can react in the best kind of way, and also in a way where they feel comfortable talking to you about these things. Where they know that they can ask you questions. That's so key.
Yeah, so many times communication is the essence of resolving problems related to potential terror threats or relationships or at the workplace. All right, Dr. Carol Lieberman, also known as the terrorist therapist. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.